Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the second installment of our Town Forest Stories webinar series. We're continuing our examination of community-owned forest land through the lens of conservation commissions with today's episode on stewardship and planning. Once again, we are pleased to feature perspectives from both local volunteers and the natural resource professionals they've partnered with. My name is Gunnar Nurmi, and in addition to being a member of the AVCC, Association of Vermont Conservation Commission's Board of Directors, I work as the land acquisition specialist for the Vermont Department of Forests, Parks and Recreation. So while I mostly work with state lands, I often partner with conservation commissions on projects. FPR administers the United States Forest Service Community Forest Funding Program, and our department more broadly provides technical support and other assistance for conservation commissions and those managing town-owned forest land across the state. Before we kind of get into the presentation, just a few quick housekeeping items before we hand it over to our guest speakers. You're welcome to keep your camera on throughout, but please remain on mute to minimize background noise and distractions. We strongly encourage you to ask questions, but ask that you either put them in the chat as we go, or use Zoom's built-in Q&A function, or hold on to them until the end after the presentation, if you'd like to ask yourself. As is always the case, we welcome your curiosity and encourage you to share your own thoughts and experiences. Want this to be a dialogue, always better, and that's the case. So in September of 2023, the town of Pownal added 300 acres and a right-of-way corridor to its town forest, also known as the Strobridge Recreation Area, restoring community access that was lost when Tropical Storm Irene washed away a road back in 2011. This acquisition was a collaboration between Pownal, the Vermont Land Trust, the Vermont Housing Conservation Board, and the Vermont Outdoor Recreation Economic Collaborative. In January, after 18 months of visioning workshops and meetings, focus groups, community surveys, tablings, and one-on-one discussions, the Pownal Conservation Commission shared its draft integrated management plan with the public. Developed in partnership with Tessa McGann, County Forester with FPR, the Department of Forests, Parks and Recreation, the plan outlines long-term conservation, recreation, and timber management goals for the now 1,000-acre town forest property. Tonight, we're happy to be joined by Nate Fowle, Chair of the Pownal Conservation Commission, Jennifer Boucher, Chair of the Pownal Parks and Recreation Committee, and Tessa McGann, County Forester for Southwestern Vermont, to talk about the work that went into forming that management plan and the next steps for the town of Pownal. So I'll hand it over to Nate, Jennifer, and Tessa.
Hey, everyone. I will get this slideshow started, and then we'll let Jen kick it off here. All right, can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Yeah? All right, go for it, Jen.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting us to share our story about the Pownal Town Forest. I'm excited to tell you how this project has evolved into, what we have today. Could you do the next slide, Nate?
Yep.
All right, so the story of the Pownal Town Forest started almost 100 years ago at this point with the Pownal Tanning Company, which was originally a mill where cotton and textiles were produced. And when that industry kind of headed south, the new owners purchased the site and turned it into a tanning company. And the site was advantageous for this industry because it's located adjacent on the west side to the Hoosic River, and on the easterly side of the site is the railroad. So it was a very convenient location for a manufacturing operation. And the Pownal Tanning Company converted sheep and cow hides into leather for about 50 years. As part of their operation, they acquired adjacent forest lands in segments over many decades for the timber, and also there was a mountainside reservoir known as Reservoir Hollow, that supplied water to the factory, but also to a number of residents in North Pownal. And if you traverse that trail today, you can still see remnants of that old water system. In total, Pownal Tanning Company acquired about 700 acres of forest land, which borders New York along the Taconic Ridge. It was not an adjoining parcel. There was a parcel in between the parcels that they acquired, but it was in very close proximity. And I think in just one point, the properties in like a triangle adjoined. Pownal Tanning Company used toxic or forever chemicals in their manufacturing operation, things like sulfuric acid, dyes, solvents, polyurethane. And unfortunately, they discharged millions and millions of gallons of their wastewater directly into the adjacent Hoosic River. And that was primarily through the 1960s when the Vermont Water Board started to get involved in that discharge. And then in the 1960s to 70s, they built lagoons on their parcel to hold the water. And there's also a sludge landfill, but that was not enough to control their pollution. And they were still discharging 250,000 to 300,000 gallons of wastewater a day into the Hoosic River. And this continued into the 1980s with litigation and fines with the Vermont Attorney General and the Agency of Natural Resources. I think the fines totaled something in the area of $7 or $8 million. And the tanning company went into bankruptcy in 1988. And then fast forward, the site, the 28-acre site where the factory was located, was declared an EPA Superfund site in 1999, one of the first in the country, actually. And then a couple of years later, after the bankruptcy proceedings and the property was auctioned off, the town was able to work with the VHCB and Vermont Land Trust, and they acquired the forest lands on the Taconic Ridge, the 700 acres, for about $200,000 back in 2002. So this slide kind of describes what we've been going through for the last 2 decades with access to the 700 acres, which was at the time named the Strobridge Recreation Area in honor of a select board member who helped to acquire that land. But these are just headlines from the local Bennington Banner and from Vermont Digger, just kind of talking about seeking access to the Taconic Crest Trail, which was through this property, and legal access to any portion of the 700 acres. There was originally a woods road that led up to near where the reservoir was located, and that road started to degrade, I think, in the late 90s, early 2000s, and was no longer passable by motor vehicles, and it continued to erode. The town didn't believe that it was economically feasible to save the road because it's adjacent to the Hoosic River. And then my understanding is that the access portion completely washed into the Hoosic River around the time of Superstorm Sandy, which was in 2011. So that's the northern portion of the forest land. There were also opportunities over the last 2 decades where adjacent parcels had come for sale or ownership was transferred. So there were definitely attempts to negotiate rights of way with new owners, tried to potentially acquire some of the adjacent properties to get the access, but in all cases, that didn't transpire. And also, tried to work on existing rights of way within the deeds of the original purchases, but none of those opportunities came into fruition. So for the last 2 decades, there has not been access, legal public access to the town's forest lands. So then we can fast forward to 2020, and in the fall of 2020, the Pownal Parks and Rec Committee was formed, and the primary purpose of the committee was to attain access to the forest land. 2020, obviously, we were in the midst of the COVID pandemic, and outdoor recreation suddenly became a lot more important. And so there was a lot of traction with that. Around that time, the VOREC grant opportunity arose. And again, I think because of the pandemic, the amount of the grant awards were increased. They were probably like $50,000 to $100,000 previously, but in this offering, they were substantially increased. And with that grant opportunity, we made an application, and our primary route to access the forest land at that time was a pedestrian bridge over the Hoosic River. In early 2022, we were awarded a $375,000 grant, which is probably one of the largest, if not the largest, grant award that the town has ever received. Then as we looked to implement the grant in the 2022-2023 timeframe, we pivoted off of the primary route of the pedestrian bridge. And there were a couple of reasons for that. First of all, there were a lot of cost pressures. At the time, we got the estimates for the bridge, although it was like 5 to 6 years ago now. I don't know if we remember, there was a lot of raw materials increases. There was also a lot of ARPA monies available, and so construction jobs and construction costs were increasing as well. Other circumstances changed in that the parcel of land that was sandwiched between the two forest properties came for sale, and town staff and town officials were able to work with the Vermont Land Trust and negotiate also the acquisition of a 3-acre parcel, which would allow for access from a private road, which will become the town's road, up to the forest, the 300-acre parcel, which in essence is creating a 1,000-acre town forest. So that acquisition was completed simultaneously in the 23-24 timeframe, the acquisition of the 300 acres and the new access road. And that was a result of financial assistance from, again, Vermont Land Trust, VHCB, in addition to funds from the VOREC grant. And most recently, the Act 250 permit allowing for construction of a parking area, some gates, a kiosk, and road improvements that will allow the town to take over the access road. Those permits were finally received after, I think, 18 months in July of this year. So those improvements will take place this fall. So that brings us to where we are today.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. So that's where I'll take over. So before I start my piece of the presentation here, I just want everyone to be aware, and you've already heard just how many different organizations and individuals have been and are going to get involved in this project. This is, the Conservation Commission has done some work on this, but this has been an effort that's, encompassed a huge amount of both paid and volunteer labor by folks that work in Pownal, our regional commissions, our county forester. I have a list of sort of all the partners we worked with later, but yeah, just something to kind of keep in mind is that, you know, none of these things happen in a vacuum, and this was a huge project that just required an enormous amount of work and coordination across a bunch of different groups. So with that, in February 2024, Pownal formed a conservation commission. This was thanks to our executive assistant, Tara Parks, giving a presentation at a community group meeting at the Pownal Public Library, outlining sort of what open positions there were on existing committees and commissions, and also what non-existent committees and commissions it was possible to create with you know, with enough people and enough interest. And from that presentation that she gave, there were a handful of people who expressed interest, myself included, in starting a conservation commission. So we all wrote letters of interest to our select board, and they brought us in and interviewed us all. And there was definitely a healthy amount of skepticism from our members of the select board going into this. You know, we're in a very small town. It's relatively conservative, and I think there was some concern that we were going to kind of come out of the gate as climate warriors and start pushing all of these, you know, radical, you know, policies or ideas. And so through the interview process, I think we were able to reassure them that we were all in it for the same reason everyone else was. We just wanted to make the town better for everybody, and find sort of good common sense ways that we could all work together to achieve that. So thankfully, to the select board's credit, they you know, heard that from us and appointed a group of us to start the Conservation Commission. And the makeup of that CONCOM has changed significantly. We've had a bunch of turnover. We had one of our chairs went on to be a select board member. There were some people that had ended up being a better fit for them to go elsewhere. So we've definitely undergone some changes since February 2024. But I took over as the third chair in early 2025, and I've been the chair of the Conservation Commission since then. So one of the first meetings that we had, our chair at the time invited Jennifer to come give a presentation about the town forest, which I knew nothing about, and I was just so floored at how amazing of an opportunity this was, and so inspired by you know, Jennifer's enthusiasm about it, that I immediately wrote a letter of interest to join the Parks and Recreation Committee too, so that I could do some more work with Jennifer. And I think part of what allowed the Conservation Commission to get its footing was that we were able to kind of piggyback on, you know, this already 4 years of work that Jennifer and the folks at Parks and Recreation had been doing, and just try and find ways that we could kind of plug in and help out there. So let me go to the next slide. So the first sort of big project that the Conservation Commission got involved in on this was working with some amazing students at Williams College to do a public engagement project. And once again, this was something that came out of hard work that Jennifer did. We had a community hike up into the town forest just to show some interesting folks what was going on up there. And one of the people that came was Professor Sarah Gardner from Williams College. And thanks to that connection, we were able to work with them, and Sarah's class, which is a environmental design class. She sort of will embed small groups of students into different local projects to help out. And she very kindly gave us 3 awesome students to help out with the project. So they did an enormous amount of work. They put together a survey that was sent out to folks in the community. They did tabling at a bunch of events. They went to our Halloween trunk or treat event at the school and handed out information. And through all of these discussions that they had, they produced a pretty extensive presentation on yeah, what the community wanted to see out of this town forest, and that document we relied on extensively to sort of help guide us in where we wanted to take this and sort of what we should focus on. So to supplement that work, the Conservation Commission also held some sort of community input sessions, the most successful of which was a get together with a bunch of the folks who hunt and ride their ATVs regularly in this forest. And this is a really interesting property. It's, I believe, the only VLT property where any motorized vehicle usage is allowed. And the reason for that is that there's a fish and game club in Pownal that had, I think they said in like the 1970s, built a hunting camp on the property, which is still used today. By a really dedicated, small group of community members, and it's, probably 2 miles in up some pretty steep hiking. So they've historically been riding their ATVs up there, and the VLT and sort of our working group sort of recognize just the cultural importance of sort of maintaining that and making sure that the folks that have been using this were able to continue using it. And so we were able to kind of carve out a special exception for these riders to be able to continue riding to the fish and game camp. And so this hunters focus group meeting had probably 20 people show up, which was pretty unprecedented for a meeting of this kind. And we got some really, really great feedback from people. They were all super engaged and interested and had a lot to tell us. And through that, we were able to start to kind of outline, how we wanted to deal with the ATV access and sort of getting the Fish and Game Club folks to help us manage that process. And also just to understand better sort of where on the mountain they were trying to access, what was important to them, and we sort of added that into our sort of ever-growing pile of good information and input that we wanted to try and sort of help guide where we were going with this project. So we had a few other focus groups. We talked to some outdoor rec folks, some educators, bikers, and all of that information slowly made its way into the integrated management plan, which I will talk to a little bit later. The other project that the Conservation Commission did with help from Parks and Recreation and our public library was putting together we were calling community conversations sort of installation at the library, which had a map of the town forest, a bunch of information about what we were hoping to accomplish, and some sort of survey questions that we could have people answer by just sort of making tick marks on pages to sort of show their support or lack of support for different ideas. And then we continued to have a handful more group hikes over the course of the next few years, all of which were just so important to really getting the community on board and finding the people who would later become really important assets in kind of keeping this project going. Right. So, with all of that information all put together, we had a town forest working group, which was made up of Jennifer, myself, Tessa, and our executive assistant, Tara Parks, who also played an enormous role in helping to carry this grant through Act 250 permitting. She played a really integral role in making this all come together and put an enormous amount of both paid and I'm sure also unpaid work and stress into making this all happen. So that group has been meeting once a month for the last few years just to kind of get updates on what projects we're working on, figure out what needs to happen next. So that group has been a really important piece of the process as well. And we've also been joined occasionally by members of the select board, Donald Campbell from the Vermont Land Trust, who's sort of our liaison over there. So that's a really important piece of kind of making sure we're all staying coordinated. Um, uh, I and the Conservation Commission spent some time working on putting together conservation goals, which ultimately made their way into our integrated management plan, which is sort of the master plan that includes both the forest management plan and sort of all of our sort of rules and regulations and goals. And that again was a really collaborative effort. I had a great talk with Tessa and got some input from her. I reached out to our local conservation district, and if folks haven't talked with the people at their regional conservation district, I would highly recommend it. They were also a huge help. And then simultaneously, Tara was spearheading this Act 250 permitting process, which Jennifer alluded to, which was very difficult and time consuming. The tough piece there is that anytime we would send them information, it would start, I think it was a 90-day clock on them getting back to us. So we would give them some info, we'd wait 3 months, they'd come back to us and say, okay, this looks good, but we need this one other thing, and that would reset the clock again. So that was another thing that Tara really took the helm of, and just recently was able to kind of bring through to completion. And that was a huge, one of the most difficult pieces of the project. And now we're very excited to finally have some. I think hopefully by now the work has started on clearing out our parking area, and they'll be taking some trees and sort of developing a road that's going to lead up to where our trailhead is. The other thing that I don't know whether this was technically Conservation Commission or Parks and Recreation work, but the sort of big piece that I played in this process was mostly doing trail exploration and mapping, which I was very excited to do. And I spent many hours over the course of the last 2 years hiking around the forest, running all trails to sort of track my GPS tracks along the way. And we have used that mapping information for a variety of projects, including this ATV mitigation plan, which I'll get to a little bit later. So the trail development plan, we started with sort of some guiding principles that came from our public input, making sure that the trails that we focused on were trails that were going to be accessible for people of all skill levels, because there was a lot of interest in folks having a place to take their kids walking, in elderly community members having a reasonable place to hike. We also wanted to make sure that we reused as much of the existing logging roads that were on the property, of which there's probably, 20 miles, maybe more in total. Both for financial reasons, but also for conservation reasons, just to not ruin any new land that we didn't have to, given that there were already skid roads of varying ages sort of crisscrossing the property already. The other two big priorities were making sure that we had good access to the Taconic Crest Trail, which is an existing, I think it's about a 30-mile trail that runs right along the border of Vermont and New York State. And our town forest runs right up to the border, so it's just another probably half a mile from there until you hit the Taconic Crest Trail. And also there was some interest in creating an ADA accessible viewpoint somewhere on the mountain, which we've been in some good discussions about and have a few ideas on, though I think we don't currently have the funding to develop anything outside of the existing sort of views that you can find along that main road. So and then down here we'll get into these, but we've got a few things completed at this point, and a handful more projects that we need to finish within 2026, which is when our sort of grant term ends. And then we're also starting to have meetings and look towards the future about what we might be able to do down the line once we find our next source of funding. So we're very excited about carrying this project into the future. So here's my exploration map. This isn't all of the hiking that I've done up there, but it's most of it. So yeah, this has been just one of the most fun projects I've ever done. It just hiking in areas where there probably haven't been people walking in many, many years, exploring logging roads that probably date back to the 1970s and potentially even the 30s and 40s. And it's just been such an amazing adventure. There are so many beautiful spots in this town forest, and some pretty unique sort of elements that I'll get into a little bit, and I'm sure Tessa will also discuss. But yeah, just to kind of show you, this, I mean, this is all volunteer time, and whoops, and that's what it requires to make a project like this happen. So I was going out and marking out points of interest, places where there were culverts or ditches dug that needed a little bit of work to help carry water off of the trail. And also really what I was looking for was access to the Taconic Crest Trail, and just understanding how all these trails interconnected, where people were riding ATVs, and where we might be able to build small trail connections to sort of link together some of these sections of existing trail. All right, now go to the next one. So using that information from All Trails, we went ahead and I loaded all of my all of the tracks that I had created in All Trails into the I want to make sure I get the name on this right. The Vermont Center for Geographic Information has this really great database with all of these sort of publicly available layers that show different interesting elements of the forest, and ground cover and elevation and property ownership. I mean, you name it. There's just, Vermont has a really extensive database of super interesting publicly available information that was really helpful in this process. So I walked the borders of the forest, and I started kind of color coding the existing logging roads based on the condition that they were in. So the green roads here are the best developed and maintained, thanks to folks from the Fish and Game Club who had been using them. The blue trails mostly date back to the 1970s and 80s, which was sort of the last generation of logging roads before this most recent one. And then the white trail system down at the bottom, this was the area that we wanted to focus on, where it's relatively flat compared to the rest of this forest. This is, as you can see from the ley lines here, this is an incredibly steep chunk of forest for the most part. So finding trails that would be useful for your average community member was a little difficult, and this area down here luckily is sort of the most flat, and also the easiest to get to. So that white system is what is slowly becoming our sort of main trail system. And then this pink line is a trail that we are hoping to develop with our next grant, which we already have Taconic Crest Trail access through this main artery, this green road that sort of snakes its way up across the border. But this pink trail passes through a section of dry oak forest, which is particularly beautiful. It also passes through these vast swaths of blueberry and huckleberry bushes, and it has scenic views. It's definitely, in my opinion, sort of the most beautiful part of the forest. And with the exception of the bottom piece of this trail, it runs along an existing logging road that sort of runs right up the spine of the ridge in between these two valleys that are both part of the town forest. So I did a lot of work exploring around up there, trying to find the path of least resistance that would sort of allow us to make our way up to that road that runs along the spine there. So, in addition to that, we had some really great discussions and hikes with members of the Taconic Hiking Club and some talks with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. They had a lot of concerns because I guess historically there have been folks riding their ATVs from Pownal up the hill and then onto the Taconic Crest Trail. So when we were talking with them about building this Taconic Crest Trail connector, they wanted to make sure that we had a plan in place to help mitigate ATVs from making it up there. So with lots of help from lots of different folks and discussions with the fire department and New York DEC and the Taconic Hiking Club, we came up with a plan that we are hoping will start to mitigate ATVs driving up and riding on the Taconic. So the first phase of this is going to be putting up some signage just to set expectations, because for, I mean, the last 20 plus years, folks have been riding up here and nobody told them that they could or couldn't, and so there are a lot of folks who were rightfully pretty surprised and kind of dismayed when they heard that a lot of this area was not going to be legal to ride anymore. So in talking with the Vermont Land Trust, we concluded that sort of a slow phased approach would probably be the best approach to slowly start to kind of mitigate the usage without making a bunch of enemies and having all our signs ripped down. And this plan was also developed working with and talking with the folks from the Fish and Game Club, who are all very much environmentalists at heart, and they were also really concerned about a lot of the same stuff that we were in terms of erosion, and also for them, they don't want people riding around scaring off the deer when they're up there hunting. So we were able to find some good common ground on that and make some compromises and figure out a plan that we think is going to work pretty well. And we are also planning on putting a gate down at our new trailhead entrance that members of the Fish and Game Club who have their ATVs registered with VASA will be able to access. Okay. So this is just a picture of the beautiful signs that we got printed to just start letting people know the areas where they are or are not allowed to ride in the town forest. And we've included a QR code here that links over to the VASA website, where they have lots of great information about where it is legal to ride. So we're excited to start kind of directing folks to some other trails that are in the area. So, in addition to all the work that I did exploring the forest, Tessa came in and she did a ride and a forest survey and was able to contribute a bunch more information to our sort of ever-expanding map of the trail systems. And she discovered a bunch of things that I hadn't found, including this tiny little grove of old growth hemlock trees that's in one of the steepest, most inaccessible pieces of the forest, which I've since scrambled up to check out because I just couldn't let that go. And it's beautiful. It's really, really cool. And Tessa was able to use this information for her work, as well as me using it to sort of supplement what I already had and figure out sort of where we could add some trails. The whole northern section of this town forest is very hard to access right now. It takes to ride on existing logging roads, it's probably at least 6 miles before you can even start hiking down into the next valley. So I've done a few hikes down there, but Tessa was able to get access and do a lot of the mapping in that valley that I had not been able to do. And one other thing I'll mention at this point is just this one of the things I'm the most proud of about this whole project is all the way to the north of this town forest. I'll show you on the other map here. Here we go. So on this map, it's on the far right-hand side. There's this little section of the town forest that borders the Hoosic River. And that is an area where there has been some discoveries of some Native American and early European sort of artifacts and sort of archaeological sites that we know very little about. Most of this work was done by an amateur Pownal archaeologist who lived about 100 years ago and spent some time poking around out there and uncovered an amazing collection of arrowheads and axe heads and other interesting artifacts. So in putting together the conservation goals, I had a great discussion with Michael Fernandez from our conservation district, who put me in touch with the Stockbridge Munsee Band of Mohicans, who have offices in Williamstown, Massachusetts. And in discussing and working with them, we came to the conclusion that this was an area that was really important to not disturb until we had an opportunity to do some more exploration. And thanks to Tessa and thanks to our select board and the Stockbridge Munsee Band of Mohicans, we were able to convince the select board to kind of set that area aside. We're not planning on developing any trails in there. We're not planning on doing any logging in there until we can maybe work with some Williams College students or find somebody that can do a little more research in there. So conserving that little section of the forest was really important, and I'm really thankful that we were all able to work together to make that happen. So another thing that we decided to do was we wanted to make sure we had a interactive map online somewhere that people could use to learn about the trails, but also learn about the history of the forest and all of the different ecosystems that exist and the stands of trees. And so for this project, Tessa and I got together with Sam Page, who works at the Bennington County BCRC, Bennington County Regional Commission. I get all these acronyms confused. And they did an awesome job of taking the information that Tessa and I had gathered and turning it into this really awesome map that also includes a bunch of the publicly available information that Vermont has on our forests. And so this is now live on our website for access. We've got our trails, we have points of interest and viewpoints, and also all the great sort of forest survey work that Tessa did, along with a bunch of other interesting bits and pieces that folks can sort of toggle on and off as they're interested in doing so. So next, we installed some set of 3 trail counters in different parts of the forest to start tracking where people were using the forest. And we are hoping to be able to show over time, as we develop the trails, that we're getting sort of increasing numbers of people using the town forest. So this is our totals for 2025, and we were actually pretty surprised to see that there's already a decent amount of use in the town forest, and it does appear to be sort of very slowly increasing over time, which is great. So this is a group of folks from the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps who we hired to come in and do 2 weeks of work starting to develop the beginnings of our trail system. And I'll also just go to the next picture here. These are some folks from our local high school who worked with an organization called Greenagers that does sort of similar work. And I had the pleasure of being able to go out into the field and work with all these folks. And that was one of the most rewarding pieces of this whole project for me, was getting to spend some time with these both the high school students and these sort of college age kids in the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps. They were just all so wonderful to be around, and really kind of restored my faith in humanity in a lot of ways. Just getting to spend time with them and work alongside them was just so cool. And I'm really glad I got a chance to do that. And they all just they were such hard workers. They did amazing work. And thanks to these folks, we now have approximately 2 miles of trail that are in sort of varying states of completion, but completely walkable. And we also have a bridge. This now has handrails too, but this was sort of the in progress shot here. So working with both these groups is great. One of the things that's really awesome about both of these organizations is that they they do this work at a pretty severely discounted rate from what it would cost to hire a normal crew to do trail work. And the difference between what they charge us and sort of what that work is valued at can, in some cases, be strategically used as matching funds for grants. So we are hoping to work with the Greenagers again, and have them come in and do a little bit more work for us, and then use that extra chunk of money as a match for the next set of grants that we're going to be applying for. And I will just mention the Greenagers are really cool. They come in and solicit volunteers from our local schools to come out and work in the forest. So all these kids live in Pownal and Bennington, and we were looking for a group of 6 people to do 1 week of work, and they got, I think they said 70 folks come in to interview for these 6 positions to do this work. So it was really inspiring just to see that there's a lot of kids in the area that really care about this stuff and are interested in outdoor recreation. And I've already started working on urging these kids to maybe consider joining our committees and commissions as they get older, so that they can help out too. And the VYCC is typically college students, AmeriCorps volunteers, who will come and work usually over the summers, and they also just did amazing work. And in brutally hot, and as you can see here, brutally cold weather, without ever complaining, and just kept such a great attitude. And we were very lucky to work with them, and thanks to them both having these discounted rates, we were able to do quite a bit of good work on the beginnings of our trail system. So all of the trail work and all of the trail exploration work that we did, all tied into another project that I kind of spearheaded with the Conservation Commission, which was building a paper version of a trail map. So this is our sort of current and future plan for the next handful of years in terms of sort of what we want to work on developing. So again, the green trails are sort of existing trails that are easy to find and walk, and have some basic sort of wayfinding markings, although we're looking to improve that over the course of the rest of this year. The blue trails are trails that I would like to develop, but we don't necessarily have a plan for how to do that yet. Those are older logging roads that are findable and walkable, but are not yet sort of marked or made official. But I wanted to show them here, just for folks that were maybe more interested in going on a bit of an adventure. And then that orange trail is our planned connector trail to get over to the other side of the forest in this second valley, and to connect to that dry oak forest that runs up along the spine of the ridge there. So this was an enormous pain to do. I would not necessarily recommend using all trails to create a trail map, but with limited resources, we kind of did what we needed to do to make something happen. So this is a bunch of screenshots stitched together. I used Google Maps to measure distances and added the distances in. Every part of it was kind of a new and interesting challenge, but we managed to get it put together, and this trail map is now also available online and in paper version, both at Town Hall and at our library, who is the folks at the library have been incredibly supportive of this process. So that's kind of where we are at, and sort of what the Conservation Commission has been working on for the last couple of years. And now we're just going to look forward a little bit. So We are looking at Parks and Recreation at applying for a recreational trails grant, RTP grant, which I believe awards up to $50,000 to do trail development work. So we're hoping that if we can get this grant, we will be able to sort of spend some time working on our dry oak forest to kind of crest connector trail that I mentioned in the last slide. The Conservation Commission is also looking into family forest and forest carbon programs at the request of our select board, which are both programs where you can generate a little bit of money for the town to continue improving the trail systems by putting small sections of the forest into conservation in sort of with specific stipulations for a set amount of time. So we're excited to look into that and see if that's a way we could start generating a little bit of revenue to go towards continuing to improve the forest. I'm really excited to work more with the Fish and Game Camp and Fish and Game Club members on potentially finding ways to make improvements to the camp, which is in pretty rough shape, because that camp is open to anybody who wants to go explore the town forest and camp outside of hunting season when it's sort of reserved for members of the club. So that's that camp is a resource that we haven't really fully realized yet, and I think there's some potential there. I'm also really excited about developing a sort of, we're calling it a pause spot at one of the logging landings lower down in the forest, where we can put in some picnic tables and sort of create a little picnic area, and hopefully eventually develop some campsites too. In the meantime, we're doing leave no trace dispersed camping throughout the forest. But it would be nice to ultimately have a few campsites, because that's something that lots of folks in the community were excited about. The Conservation Commission is also interested in working with our local schools and encouraging them to do educational programming in the town forest. And we are hoping to put together a interpretive walking path with some signage that'll talk about the flora and fauna, the history of the forest. So that's a project that we're hoping to tackle, probably throughout this fall, winter, and into next year. And then I've also been talking with some folks from Bennington, our sort of neighboring town here, who have put together this amazing bike trail system in Bennington, and they're excited at the prospect of maybe expanding into the town forest and developing a mountain biking trail somewhere there. So those are all sort of in the preliminary stages of discussion, but we're excited to see sort of what opportunities might present themselves there. All right, so lessons learned. As you can see from this whole discussion, this project arguably started in 2002, or depending on how you look at it, 2020 or 2021, and a huge amount of the credit on making this, sort of bringing this forest together, goes to Jennifer, who was really the one that was involved in writing this grant and working with the town and Tara and others to, the VHCB and all these others that she mentioned, the VLT, to purchase this land, which all happened before our Conservation Commission even existed. And even now, we have probably less than 2 miles of trail developed. We only really have access to half of the forest by trail right now. So there's a lot more work to be done, and this project will likely take, potentially generations of people doing work to really fully realize the potential that's sort of locked up in this 1,000 acres of land. So yeah, these projects move really slow. Everything takes longer than you think. And my big takeaway is just to not let that get you down, and to really celebrate all the small victories along the way. Also, this has taken hundreds and hundreds of hours of volunteer time from people who just were so excited about this project that they were willing to go out there and do the work that needed to be done. And as great as it is to have these once a month meetings with the Conservation Commission, you can't get a whole heck of a lot done in 1 hour, and also sort of governing by committee can be really difficult. And so it does take individuals being willing to kind of put the time in to make this stuff happen. And I hope I've imparted just how rewarding that work can be once you get into this. And I've made so many really personal friends throughout this process by going on these community hikes and talking with people and telling everybody I know about this project. And that kind of leads into this next thing, community building. The coolest part about this for me has been just all the people that I've gotten to meet along the way, both just being on the Conservation Commission, but also specifically working on this project. It's put me in contact with community members I probably never would have met otherwise. I've gotten to know all the select board members, all the wonderful people at Parks and Recreation, the Planning Commission. Yeah, this has been a great opportunity to bring folks from all over the community together to sort of work towards a common goal. And yeah, those personal relationships that I've built through this, I think, will outlast this project. And so I really appreciate that piece of it a lot. And that's if you're thinking about taking on a project like this, or you're trying to encourage people to join your Conservation Commission, I think that that's kind of what I lead with, is like, you're going to get to meet so many amazing people from all over the county and learn all sorts of new stuff. And yeah, that's a really big draw for me. As the chair of the Conservation Commission, I've found this sort of extends beyond the town forest, but I found that the easiest way to make progress on projects is to really ask members what it is that they're particularly interested in, and then to really try and do everything I can to empower them to take as many steps on those projects as they can on their own, while keeping the Conservation Commission sort of in the loop about what's going on there. And for me, that sort of thing I was passionate about was the trail development, and Jennifer and others really encouraged me to go out there and do that work. And while I kept them updated, they also gave me a lot of leeway to really just make the decisions that I thought made sense at the time, and just kind of push projects ahead in between meetings, which is where a lot of the real work gets done. And yeah, just tell everybody about the projects that you're working on. That's so important. I blab about this to literally everyone I meet. If they give me the tiniest little opening to have a discussion about any of this, I jump all over it and tell them all about it. And also, yeah, committee collaboration. I think one of the things I'm the most proud of that the Conservation Commission has done is spending a lot of time focusing on trying to build relationships across all of the committees that we have in our town, and keeping track of what the select board is working on, and making sure that we're all coordinating, because there's a very limited amount of sort of volunteer hours available to get these projects done. And the more that we can coordinate and work together, the more we can sort of amplify what we're trying to do. And lastly, yeah, these building these partnerships with outside organizations. We have this very small town with very limited amounts of expertise, and this wouldn't be possible without bringing in outside experts from this insane. I had to keep on expanding this little green section of this to add more and more partners that I remembered we had worked with. But yeah, I have no background in conservation. I kind of wound up as the chair of the Conservation Commission by accident, and so I really rely a huge amount on the expertise that we have in our community, and also outside of our community, to be able to sort of make these projects happen. And all of these partners played incredibly important roles in making this project happen. So I'm very thankful for for all of the groups and all of the individuals that worked here that I've become very close with, including Tessa and Jennifer. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for bearing with me. I know that's, yeah, a lot to take in. I am happy to take questions either now or at the end if that's easier, whatever you guys think makes most sense. But yeah, that's the end of my bit, and I will pass this off to Tessa.
I'm the county forester. My name's Tessa McGann, and I helped write the forest management plan, which is one component of the larger integrated management plan, which they referenced before. And I'm just going to say a little bit about my role, my involvement in this project, and maybe inspire you to work with your county forester, those of you on Conservation Commission. So we can move forward, Nate. Great, yay. Okay, so what's a county forester? Quickly, I'm not sure how familiar people are, but I don't work for the county. I work for the state of Vermont, and I'm an employee of Vermont Department of Forests, Parks and Recreation. There are 13 county foresters in the state. That map on the left shows our different territories. Those of you with sharp eyes will notice that we don't even cover counties per se. We redrew the lines lately, so it's all over the place. You can use that QR code to find out who your county forester is if you don't know. But I cover the southwest corner, that big blue blob down in the southwest. And as a county forester, I help people steward the forests of that corner of Vermont. I do a lot of work with private landowners overseeing current use or UVA, but I also do a lot of outreach and education. I answer random phone calls about people's forests and trees. I do a lot of visits. And then also I help towns manage town-owned forests. Next slide. And I just quickly wanted to say a little bit about that piece. If your town is interested in working with your county forester, what can we do for you? We can help you work on or with municipally owned land. So not just traditional town forests, but also if like the school district owns the land, you know, sometimes the water department is the official owner of the land, but anything municipally held public land, that's not state, not federal, municipal, we can assist you developing management plans, implementing management practices, overseeing harvests, and then we all, I think, really like to do outreach and education and walks on those town lands. What we need is patience and time. I had that whole list of things that county foresters do, and by statute, town forest work is sort of at the bottom of the list. Unfortunately, we all do everything we can to cram it in and make space for it, because I think for a lot of us, it's the most rewarding work we do. We get to be real dirt foresters on town forests. But yeah, we have to balance it with a whole lot of other projects and duties. And then we also need public input and participation. So sometimes there are towns where they have a two-person committee or just the select board, or one member of the select board has sort of been given control over the town forest, and that can be totally legal and acceptable and the right move in a certain situation. But we as county foresters are asked to prioritize projects that really seek out public participation. We work with select boards and committees who really help facilitate that, do the extra mile. Those are the projects that we tend to go for. So next slide. And that's just what Pownal did, fortunately. They really demonstrated the commitment to getting the public input, which is helped me be able to say yes and make space for this project when they came to ask me to help develop their forest management plan. So a little bit about the process of the plan, what goes into a plan. I think of it in terms of what are the landowner goals, so the community goals. When the landowner is the town, what is the community, what do they want to see from that land? What benefits of the forest are they excited about? What kind of relationship do they want to have with the forest? We hold that on one side. And then we also think about what are the conditions of the forest? What can it support? What does the forest need for its own health and development and resilience? And then how do we unite those two things into one 10-year plan that lays out action items to support all of that? It doesn't have to be a 10-year plan. That's just the norm in Vermont, but not required. Right, next one. So the landowner goals, in this case, those were sort of in many ways handed to me by the Conservation Commission. They had a list of draft goals and ideas, and we had some conversations. I gave a little bit of feedback on those goals, but I have them listed here. promote old forest characteristics, fostered structural diversity, which ties into resilience, control invasive species, improve habitat, support sustainable timber production, manage wildfire risks, and enhance food foraging resources. These are great goals. I love them. You can go to the next slide. They had a lot more to say than just those goals. This was just to show you that there's a lot of nuance and thought that went into each one of these. I just wanted to show you, we're not going to read through this whole slide. We'll go to the next one. All right, so we had those goals. I had those handed to me. I had them in mind, and then I had to get to the conditions of the forest, which you can hit. Forest inventory and data collection. So to get to the conditions of the forest, I had to go out to the forest and collect data. From this picture, you can see, as we talked about, it is a very steep forest. We can do next slide. Here is a map on the right of the town forest boundary in red, and all those points are 102 different inventory plots. Because this forest was so large, 1,000 acres is pretty big and very steep. All of that green shaded area is what we consider technically steep land, greater than 30% slope, super steep land. I recruited 3 of my coworkers to help me with this inventory. I also commandeered the ATV out of the state's Rutland office to help us get around. And with all that help, we gathered data at each of these plots over the course of about 2.5 weeks in July of last year. At each of these plots, I measured trees, we gathered species data, forest health, we looked at the ground cover, herbaceous plants, understory composition, we gathered wildlife signs, all kinds of data that we picked up at each of these points and as we traveled through the forest along the way. All right, next slide. So I took all that data and sat on it for a while. Like I said, we ask for your patience as county foresters, and I finally delivered the first draft of the management plan based on that data, based on the goals. I created a first draft of the plan December 4th. So almost 6 months later, I presented that to the select board for the first meeting, pretty much, got feedback from them, and then created a second draft that was delivered almost 2 months later. And that was at a very public meeting that the Conservation Commission put together and hosted and did a lot of great advertising for. It was very well attended, got lots of feedback on Zoom and in person, and then created a final draft that I presented at a select board meeting in late February. Next slide. This is just an example of some of the feedback that I got at those meetings, things people wanted to see in the plan, adding possibility of sugaring, speaking more and to foraging and wildfire risk. Like Nate said, he pointed out, I didn't know about it at the time, but the really important archaeological features in that northernmost portion of the plan. I had originally thought maybe a harvest could happen there, but we took that out. We're protecting that until we do further research. And then I added more language about buffering trails and protecting recreational sites when we do any management activity. Next slide. So what's in the plan? Talking a lot about it. Next slide. I'm not going to go into it too much because it's 72 pages long. It's a really long plan. Right, next slide. But I'll give you a quick overview. I divided the forest in terms of being able to describe it and think about managing it. I divided it into 21 separate forest stands. That's a lot. Stands are differentiated by what kinds of trees are growing there, the species, the ages, the management histories, anything that makes these distinct areas that should be treated differently, taken care of differently moving forward. Next slide. One big thing we did is I designated 8 of these stands as reserve areas, which will be guided primarily by passive management. People think of these as no-touch zones. These are really ecologically really special sites, like that dry oak forest Nate was talking about. There are a lot of, actually, what the state has designated large swaths of these forests prior to the town owning it as natural communities of statewide significance. So they're just ecologically special. Because they're in the southwest corner, we don't see a lot of it in the state, and they're intact ecosystems that are functioning well. They don't really need a lot of help from us at this point. So we're just going to let them keep doing their thing as best they can We would step in if there was an incursion of invasive plants or anything like that, but for the most part, we're just going to leave them be. Next slide. These are some pictures of those places. So beautiful. All right, next slide. And then I did recommend harvesting in 7 different stands, and those are highlighted, those are colored in the picture of the map here. We'll move on to the next one. Why harvesting? Well, to promote things that I think are very much in line with the goals that we showed at the beginning. Creating areas of young forest to increase structural diversity and habitat, grow large trees even larger, give them more growing room, which helps store carbon, creates greater old forest characteristics, increase large snags, down deady wood for habitat, carbon, structure, all of it. I want to encourage the growth of more oaks and hickories because of beech leaf disease, which many of you may have heard of. It's killing beech trees much more rapidly than pre-existing diseases on our landscape, and it is very prevalent in the Pownal Town Forest. So thinking about how can we get other nut-producing trees to grow. And then any money that is made from these harvests, we really want to invest back into the trails. We talked a lot about there being this crazy spaghetti network of trails in all kinds of conditions. A lot of those can and should be improved, and then also to support our rural economy. Other activities that I recommended are controlling introduced invasive plant populations. There's not too many, so get in while it's easier. We also recommended some testing for contamination at ideal foraging locations before you really give a wholehearted recommendation that people forage. We want to make sure that it is safe, and then generally more trail improvements. Yeah. So looking forward, what's on the horizon right now? I will say none of those harvests are scheduled for at least another 2 or 3 years. I gave myself some breathing room, but I am excited to engage again and help put this together when the time comes. And in the meantime, this is a picture from a public walk we did in late May, and hopefully we'll be leading more walks with the public, work on monitoring and coming up with a good maintenance plan for the trails. Yeah, and then revisiting the harvest plan in a year or 2. So that's the end of my spiel. Excited to take questions. Again, I have a QR code to find your county forester if you don't know who it is, but you can also just reach out to me and ask me things, even if I'm not your county forester. All right.
Well, awesome. Thank you, Jen, Nate, and Tessa, for that incredible presentation. That was really great. We'll now take some time for questions. If you have questions, please use the raise hand feature if you'd like to ask a question, or you can put one in the chat if you haven't done so already. I know there's a couple of questions in the chat that we can get to if there aren't any others. So feel free to raise hands if you have any questions. Seeing none right away, I'll move on to the questions that were in the chat. Peter Hayden asked, Jen, when you were talking about the VOREC funding, you mentioned an Act 250 permit. Peter was wondering why that was required.
The 3-acre parcel that we acquired was part of an existing parcel that had an Act 250 permit. So because of that, we had to go through an amendment process with that. So it took a lot longer than we anticipated, but it is completed.
That makes sense. Thank you. Peter also asked if there's a conservation easement on the property. I believe there is, held by Vermont Land Trust. But Nate and Jen, I'd love if you could elaborate on the easement, your relationship with the Land Trust, and kind of how that works.
Jen, you probably know more about that than I do.
Yeah, so the easement came with the original purchase back in 2002, and there was an initial woodland management plan that was established, written by a consultant. A lot of it didn't go into effect or wasn't used because a lot of the activities that were proposed couldn't come to fruition because of the public access issue. With the most recent purchase, That also has a conservation easement. They are two different conservation easements, very interestingly. And so we worked collaboratively with the Vermont Land Trust, and Nate mentioned Don Campbell, to establish, there was an interim management plan, and now there is a final management plan, but it's been a great working relationship with VLT and Don Campbell, who's just been a huge champion of this project. I can't speak highly enough. And so, always open dialogue, and yeah, it's a great partnership.
Awesome. Jamie Schultz asked, Nate, you were talking about when you were discussing trails, you mentioned trail counters. He was wondering what trail counters you found to be effective.
Ooh, I'll have to look up the brand of them again. They're really great. They use a like a laser eye to sort of track the number of people that walk past them. And the big advantage of doing that versus having a camera is that the batteries last forever. And if you hold on about 10 seconds while you're asking the next question, I have the manual here with me and I can let you know what the brand name is.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I'll move on, but maybe you could pop that in the chat. John Binhammer asked, was there opposition from the select board or select board members for any of your plans? And if so, how did you handle this?
I wouldn't say that there was opposition from select board members. I think that there was some good questions that were asked, and some good feedback on the management plan, and taking into consideration the public input and all of the outreach that was done, like Nate mentioned with Williams College. But I think they were fully supportive and really, really wanted to try to get the access to this forest.
Great. If there are, I see Nate just put the brand of the trail counters in the chat. Thanks, Nate.
Yep.
If there are no other questions, there's one I wanted to ask before we wrap up, which was, you mentioned there's a town forest working group, and I'm curious how that group works together with the Conservation Commission, and if the Conservation Commission will be the long-term steward of the forest moving forward.
Yeah, so that working group really largely operated outside of the Conservation Commission or Parks and Recreation. It was really just mostly it ended up being sort of Jennifer and Tara and I, with Tessa coming into and yeah, the integrated management, or I guess sort of our section of the integrated management plan as opposed to the forest management plan that Tessa did, really was largely Jennifer that did the work for that. She went through a bunch of other similar forest management plans and kind of put together a working draft, and then she and I had a bunch of meetings separately from this working group to work together on sort of refining that plan, and we kind of divided and conquered the different sections. But that work was done largely outside of the Conservation Commission. In terms of the long-term stewardship, one of the things that's in that integrated management plan is the idea that we're going to have the select board sort of designate a group of people that are going to sort of oversee the long-term management of this forest, and that will include members of Parks and Recreation, of the Conservation Commission, select board, and hopefully some community members as well. And they're going to be meeting on a somewhat regular basis just to kind of look at where things are at and sort of keep track of everything.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I think that's the time we have. So thank you all. Thank you to our presenters for a great presentation and great discussion. Thank you all the participants for being here today. A recording of this webinar will be posted to our YouTube channel, and we'll also be adding these case studies to our archive of local conservation success stories that we keep on the AVCC website to inspire and inform future Conservation Commission members. The third and final installment of our Town Forest Stories series is scheduled for Thursday, September 10th at 12 p.m. noon, and we'll examine how the commissions in Bradford and Rockingham have worked with other stakeholders to build and maintain recreation trails on their town lands. You can find the registration link in the chat or on our website. Please also save the date for our 2026 annual meeting, which will be held at noon on Tuesday, September 22nd. As in past years, 3 conservation commissions will join us over Zoom to share updates on their tiny grant-funded projects. This year's theme is connectivity and conservation, with a focus on forest blocks and wildlife corridors. Again, you can find the registration link in the chat. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us at info@vtconservation.org with any questions, comments, or suggestions for future webinar topics, or to discuss other ways we can better support your work. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you back on Zoom in September.